Hello, so welcome to our Housing Ombudsman podcast today. I am joined today by Zoe Miller, one of our insight and systemic managers here at the Housing Ombudsman, who wrote the follow-up report we're going to be talking about today. Zoe, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, Victoria. We meet again. Yes, so as you say, I'm one of our insight and systemic managers, and I work in the insight and development team. And part of what we do is to produce the spotlight reports and the subsequent follow-up reports.
Lovely stuff. So we're here to talk about the Spotlight on Noise Complaints Time to be Heard follow-up report. And the report summarises our evaluation of our Spotlight on Noise Complaints Time to be Heard, which we published originally in October 2022. And the follow-up report came out in April 2024. So my first question to you, Zoe, is how did you compile the evidence that you used in the noise follow-up report?
There were two elements to this, our data and then the evidence provided to us by landlords. In terms of data, we looked at how many downloads of the report there's been since publication and our current maladministration rate for both noise and ASB. We also then did an exercise where we looked at the landlord responses and broke it down into how many homes that represents per landlord type. We haven't presented data in that way before, but I think it works really well in terms of showing reach and impact. So it's likely that we'll do that again in the future. The second part of the evidence base was reviewing the responses and supporting documents sent to us by landlords and then analysing them to look for themes and trends. So this included reviewing self-assessments against the original noise report's recommendations, the covering emails, and also other supporting documents that we were sent, such as leaflets. So we sent quite a lot of draft leaflets or finalised leaflets about being a good neighbour, and also we've sent quite a lot of policies. We then also collated and reviewed the feedback we received verbally during our virtual evaluation session. 55 landlords attended that. It's the first time we've done that before, and there were some very interesting conversations and debates.
So what kind of questions did you ask landlords?
We asked a deliberately open-ended question, which was, what changes have you made or actions taken since the report's publication? And we emphasised we're particularly keen to capture good practice and positive outcomes. The reason we kept it so open is because we were interested in seeing what landlords identified as their main changes or actions, rather than us potentially influencing or leading the response by categorising possible answers. So we didn't want to ask anything such as, do you now have a separate noise policy, for example?
Yeah, because our call for evidence from the original Spotlight report, it highlighted in there that 76% of landlords dealt with noise reports under their ASB policy, even though residents and landlords told us that household noise was actually the most complained about noise issue, not ASB. So we asked landlords to consider developing a strategy for handling non-statutory noise and to treat reports like these seriously, sensitively and proportionately. Did landlords tell you about policies and procedures on this?
Thank you. Yes, that was absolutely one of the key recommendations from the original report due to the call for evidence responses, and also because our casework clearly identified this as a theme. We've had a really positive response to this. 45% of landlords now have or are planning a good neighbourhood management policy. 38% of landlords said they have reviewed their existing policies and procedures, and 22% of landlords now have or are planning a separate noise policy. Landlords also explained to us what these policy changes look like in practice. So this covers areas such as better use of triaging noise complaints to ascertain whether they are household noise or ASB, and also reframing their mediation approach as conversation, not confrontation, as they had identified that mediation had previously been seen as looking at apportioning blame. What was particularly pleasing to see in the evaluation was a general shift from taking non-ASB matters more seriously and also assessing the noise complaint more in terms of impact on the individual, as opposed to just, does it meet the threshold for ASB or statutory noise? So not just a change in policy, but also a change in mindset.
Thanks, Zoe. So again, back to the original report, we really encourage landlords to focus more on preventative actions, including making better use of the void standard to really help reduce noise concerns for those residents who are incoming into those properties. In the original report, we say that taking action to prevent or mitigate for the typical sources of noise nuisance will actually, over time, be more cost efficient than handling noise complaints. And actually, it will also provide a better quality of service to residents. What did landlords say they'd done to change or improve their void standard?
That's right. The report urges a prevention is better than cure approach. And this is another area where the feedback and responses from landlords were very encouraging. A third of landlords told us they've made improvements and changes to their void standard, and that crucially, the benefits of this are already being seen. And there were lots of examples provided in terms of what measures landlords have put in place. Some of these include reviewing previous reports of noise from the property and conducting noise insulation checks, as well as the installation of soft door closure mechanisms, door pads, or anti-vibration washing machine mats. And there's lots more examples in the follow-up report as well. Landlords told us about sourcing grants for their residents, and I think it's really important to know that not all of these costs have to be borne by the landlord or resident. So, for example, one landlord told us they'd accessed grants totalling over 130,000 for residents in the last financial year, which is very impressive and hopefully shows that costs do not always have to be a barrier to make some of these improvements and changes. Some landlords are already seeing a reduction in noise complaints as a result of these changes, and that illustrates how effective this preventative approach can be.
So it's really interesting that, those landlords, that one landlord access grants totaling over £130,000 for residents is a huge sum of money. So
Yes.
It is out there to support landlords and residents as well. So back again to the original Spotlight report, We said in there that landlords need to be sensitive to the tone of their communication regarding noise and ASB. And we went on to give some really specific recommendations regarding the tone of communication and also preparing for their access to information standards by ensuring that professional courtesy in internal and external communications. What change did the landlords tell you they'd made?
29% of landlords told us they've made changes as a result of those specific recommendations that you mentioned. There was a lot of variety in how landlords have approached this. So we've seen quite a lot of change in language and terminology. So some of these examples include removing terms such as perpetrator or the term incidents for non-ASB issues, as well as talking more about considerate living as opposed to framing it as being a good neighbour. We were also provided with a lot of examples about staff training that's been introduced. So some of the examples include having difficult conversations, bias and discrimination, and effective communication. Some landlords have looked beyond these and set up initiatives such as customer care charters with their residents to set out what standards residents should expect in terms of the communication and the approach and respect and so forth. But going back to your previous question about what we asked landlords and my response about how we wanted landlords to identify their own priority areas for change, 4 landlords told us they now consider reasonable adjustments as part of their approach to noise complaints. It's really reassuring to see this identified, and it ties in really well with our recent spotlight on attitudes, rights and respect. Examples of some of this reasonable adjustment approach in action include trialling noise cancelling headphones for people with noise sensitivity, offering home visits or telephone calls to listen to noise, particularly where a resident may have difficulty using a noise app or recording device.
So you mentioned it there, but our recent spotlight on attitudes, respect and rights, we published that back in January 2024. It's a really useful resource for landlords looking to improving communication, as well as the title says, attitudes, respect and rights. So back to the original Spotlight on Damp and Mould report. We said in that report that the quality and quantity of records in a case can sometimes hamper a noise investigation. And we saw examples from our casework, including noise reports being linked to a person rather than a property, and different systems across different departments. And that means there's more margin for error in losing vital information. And we made 3 knowledge and information management recommendations around the retention and the processing of data, around documenting decisions and aligning these databases. What did landlords tell you they were doing with regards to these?
We received quite mixed responses about the knowledge and information, the KIM aspect of the recommendations. 22% of landlords told us they've made changes to their KIM systems and processes, with a further 2% telling us they plan to make changes. And there are definitely some landlords who feel they are now more data and insight driven in their approach, such as implementing dashboards to help identify any noise hotspots, tagging properties on the system where noise complaints have been made so that they can be assessed at void stage, which then feeds into what we were discussing earlier about making better use of the void standard. But other landlords spoke of still having a poor KIM culture, so systems not being joined up, poor record keeping regarding noise and ASB complaints, which shows it clearly is still an area of development for a lot of landlords.
Thanks, Zoe, that's really interesting. Sticking on the subject of the Knowledge and Information Management Spotlight Report, it was published in 2023. It's a really useful resource for landlords who are looking to improve in knowledge and information management and record keeping. And we also run some virtual workshop sessions and have an e-learning on this topic if you want to check those out on our Learning Hub via the Housing Ombudsman website. So moving then on to multi-agency working, we highlighted some of the barriers and challenges in multi-agency working in our original report, and we recommended landlords review service level agreements with third parties to really make sure that individual roles and responsibilities are clear. How were landlords getting on with implementing these?
I'd say definite signs of progress, but still more to be done. And hopefully the examples in the follow-up report will help with that. 20% of landlords told us they've implemented this recommendation. In addition to reviewing the SLAs, some landlords have gone further and revisited their referral pathways, established regular programme of meetings with partner agencies, and also introduced information sharing protocols. One landlord has set up a joint pilot with Mind, the mental health charity, and they carry out joint visits. And it would be interesting to perhaps get an update from them at a later date to see whether that pilot has been successful and why.
More to come on that then, Zoe, if they want to talk to us about it.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So you mentioned in this report that not all the recommendations in the original report have a high engagement rate. Could you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yes, so with any Spotlight report, there are always some recommendations that have more of an impact than others. And also some recommendations can also take longer to implement and embed. With this follow-up report, we've seen the areas of the lowest engagement so far are around increased presence of staff on estates. Only 16% of landlords referenced this in their response in terms of having made improvements in this area. From the responses we've seen, this absolutely isn't because landlords are unable to see the benefit of this. It's more a case of not being in a position to implement it due to resource implication. And this ties in with our discussion about KIM earlier. All roads lead back to KIM, because what some landlords are doing is trying to circumvent this issue by using data and insight to analyse which areas would benefit most from an increased staff presence, and then having a targeted approach as to where they direct that resource.
Wow, so much food for thought there, and so much extra reading for people who are listening to this podcast to do. Thank you so much for joining me today, Zoe, for this podcast.
Thank you.
If you haven't already read the Spotlight on Noise report or the follow-up report, we would very much encourage you to do do so. It's a really interesting read. And also check out our other learning resources, which includes an e-learning and some virtual workshops coming soon to the Housing Ombudsman Service Centre for Learning. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much, Zoe.